Welcome to the Sewing Report. I'm Jen. This channel is all about sewing crafts and DIY projects. I've been spending the last couple weeks on one sewing project that is taking me forever, and that is McCall's 7730. It is a super cute lined women's jacket. I'm making view A. It's a shorter version with flounces on the bodice and sleeves. I thought it looked awesome, and this is going to be a gift for somebody, but because the recipient and I are about the same size, I will be able to model it in a future episode here, so check back for that. Hopefully it doesn't take me forever. I was looking at a lot of reviews for this pattern. I wasn't able to find a whole lot or really any videos that anyone else had done. So I wanted to take you through this whole process, and one thing that was recommended by other makers of this pattern was to draft a facing for the lining of this pattern to give it a better finished look, which I definitely agreed, so that's what we're doing right now. We're going to be using the main front and back pieces of the pattern, tracing paper, and marking pen. A few years ago I picked up this fit and fashion styling curve at a sewing workshop. Unfortunately I can't find it anywhere online, but it's so useful being transparent and having slots to mark it 2 common seam allowances. Most commercial sewing patterns use a 5/8 inch seam allowance. From the neckline edge, I created a curve between 2.5 and 3 inches out for the main fabric facing. At the center back, deduct 5/8 of an inch because the lining is 2 pieces sewn together, but the facing piece will be just 1 cut on the fold, so you don't need the seam allowance. You'll also need to measure where the bottom stitch line will be, as that will help you draft the lining piece. Transfer all the original pattern markings. Then I traced the rest of the pattern back. With the facing piece slid underneath, mark the stitch line, then 5/8 of an inch beyond that, which will be the cut line. The facing and lining pieces will not be an exact puzzle fit because you need to account for the seam allowances, so there will be an overlap. They should look like this when completed. Now it's time to do the front facing, which will run along the neckline and open at the center. I marked a line 2 inches and 5/8 from the center and 2.5 inches from the neck stitch line, so it matches up with the back facing. Cut out the front facing piece and repeat the step of marking the stitch line where the main fabric will be sewn to the lining. Trace the rest of the front piece, slide the facing underneath, and calculate 5/8 of an inch beyond the stitch line to mark the cut line. After cutting out both front facing and lining pieces, they should look something like this with overlap of double the seam allowance. Now let's move on to constructing the faced jacket lining. Because this is a somewhat structured garment, I interfaced the facing pieces with Pro Sheer Elegance Medium Fusible from Fashion Sewing Supply. Trace the pattern pieces onto the interfacing, but I like to cut it out slightly smaller than the pattern pieces so the interfacing fits within them. Fuse according to the manufacturer's instructions for whatever interfacing you choose. It will also help to use a pressing cloth to avoid getting glue dots all over your iron. The fabrics for this project are a lemon yellow boucle suiting in a rayon polyester blend and an off-white Rayon Bemberg for the lining. Pinning the facing and lining pieces was challenging, especially at the neckline curve because of that opposite orientation. The markings at the front center neckline can be used as a guide for where they need to meet up. Sewing tip, clip into the inner corner of the facing so it's not as tricky to stitch to the lining. Cut the corner of the lining to eliminate bulk when you press the pieces flat. Because the lining fabric is prone to fraying, I trimmed some excess with pinking shears. After a good pressing, I top stitched a 1/4 inch onto the lining to help keep the facing from flopping out. Then I trimmed the extra seam allowance of the main fabric, knowing there are 2 stitch lines securing it. Onto the back, first I sewed the lining pieces together and pressed the seam allowance open. Pinning the lining to the facing also had that same challenge due to the opposite curves. Using a ton of pins helped evenly distribute the fabric and there was no puckering. I top stitched the back piece and even added a Sewing Report label to the center to give it that custom look. With the face to lining pieces done, I sewed them together following the pattern instructions. Here's what it looks like after the sleeves have been attached and it's ready to sew to the outer jacket pieces. And we're back with the finished lining. With facing, I think it turned out okay, but the real test will come when I put this together with the outer fabric, so we're gonna see how this turns out. But check back soon because I will have an updated video where I finish this jacket and see how it all turns out. So far, I do like this pattern. Sometimes with the McCalls or Big 4 patterns, I feel like the finishing techniques they recommend don't look very professional, or they may be a little bit like they don't make sense, but with this pattern, M7730, so far I've been quite pleased with what the instructions have said, and I followed them pretty exactly. I did make one change to the lining, but I will be documenting that in the next episodes. This was the first time I've ever attempted to draft my own facing. I survived. I know you can too. So get to it. I hope you found this video helpful. I'll also link some other garment sewing videos right here. I'm Jennifer Moore with the Sewing Report. I'll see you guys in the next video.